If you look at the Venn diagram of high quality academic programs and delivered in a scalable way online, it's a very limited subset of institutions. A lot of institutions want to do this, and it takes a lot of alignment and leadership and investment. And some institutions abandon online and they say, we tried it, we don't want to do it again. And now they're sort of looking at what they had and saying, can we rebuild this Frankenstein?
Welcome to In Your Element, a podcast on the Enrollify Podcast Network and brought to you by Element 451, an advanced student engagement CRM providing higher ed institutions with a competitive admissions advantage from recruitment to enrollment through the use of AI. On each show, we ask 5 questions about current challenges, exciting opportunities, and what's next in higher education. I'm your host, Eric Stoller, and today we talk to Ray Lutzky, Director of the Academic Network at InStride. Their mission is to enable employers to provide life-changing strategic enterprise education programs to their employees in partnership with the highest quality global academic institutions. Basically, they make it easy for employers to offer top-level higher ed paths for their employees. For Ray, prior to joining InStride in 2019, he had been at universities working with individual students and recruiting them for institutions and on-campus programs.
And moving over to InStride was really a change because we work exclusively with online programs. It gave me sort of a crash course in some of the myths that I had about online learning and also some of the advantages that you really don't hear about or can take for granted when you're really focused on on-campus learning.
So on the show today, I talked to Ray about how higher ed institutions can leverage partnerships with corporations, monetizing their content, and creating strategic marketing initiatives. And for Ray, he's seen that firsthand with some of the partnerships that they've guided at InStride.
When the company was founded in 2019, it was because of the genesis story around Arizona State University, which is the founding university partner of InStride, and Starbucks, whereby Starbucks leadership had made the decision that if any partner at a Starbucks wanted to finish their degree, they could do that at ASU for free. So it was about degree completion for the retention of employees that would really drive value for an organization interacting with customers. That's still very important. But where we are today, upskilling and reskilling are the buzzwords that you hear a lot. And those are often short form credentials, things that maybe aren't tied to an accreditation, but are extremely valuable and may result in a credential by exam or by other methods.
It's interesting. I was going to make a comment about, you all are very fortunate that maybe Michael Crow's favorite coffee was Starbucks with that partnership with Arizona State University.
Absolutely. I think it was a match made in heaven. It was a great way for thousands of learners to finish their degrees.
When I just remember when it came out, it was such a new thing. It was still being seen as like, wow, Starbucks is doing this, ASU, they're doing this. But the rest of maybe the country, the rest of, the sort of higher ed environment, they're not going to get into this. And I just keep thinking, what's the cost to institutions who maybe they don't want to offer these types of programs? They want to kind of keep their status quo going.
Absolutely. I think that's a common thread. I think you hear that often, that there are a lot of challenges for a university or college to go in this direction. It takes real leadership and it takes innovation and it takes moving some people out of their comfort zone. I think for some institutions, it's something that they have to do because they're driven by a need for revenue or a need to be able to support the programs that they have, or by a need to have close corporate ties. Sometimes a corporate partner coming in and saying, we'd like this from you is enough to persuade faculty and others to do the job. In other cases, they're just taking what they have and putting that online, and that's okay. But when they're competing with short form credentials versus a 9 to 12 month master's in cybersecurity, the value of those two credentials in the mind of a prospective learner can be the same in terms of their career right now.
Right.
And I think that the universities that are smart about this, and you've mentioned ASU, is that they're integrating some of those certifications into the degree programs that are still very professionally geared and ROI focused for the learner.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is it's not just about dumping everything you've got online and saying, look at what we're doing. It's about sort of tailoring it a bit more, customizing it a bit more, but still having it be embedded in some of the academic structures of an institution.
And the branding, I think.
Mm,
What comes across clearly from a university, and one of its key strengths in this market, is its brand and the quality that comes with that. And I think that's also where the faculty are concerned that things may not be correct. So I think what you've seen some innovative top tier schools, top tier business schools do is spin off versions of their brand of education, but in a non credit credential that is easily digestible, that is understandable by the market, and that is connected to skills that will advance the learner in their career.
right. And they've also partnered up with industry. I mean, I remember, I think it was Howard University. They partnered up with Google. I think it was around computer science. And of course, that makes the headlines, but it also benefits learners.
Absolutely. It's really a great opportunity for the learner to get some really critical skills, especially when you hear so much criticism of the value of a degree. Unfortunately, for some employers that want to fund this, they question the value of paying for a full degree, especially at the price tag some of our universities out there want to charge. Luckily, I think we've been able to give them some really great options. But there are other academic institutions out there that the cost of attendance is based on a student credit hour, and that's the same whether it's online or on campus. And that can be hard for a lot of folks paying the bill to swallow.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how you almost need a CFO who understands the ability to sort of think beyond maybe the tried and true.
Absolutely. You've got to have C-level buy-in, and especially from the folks looking at the risks. When a company decides to pay for learners to get an education, it's a tremendous investment, and it really needs to pay off. The ROI has to be there, and understanding that ROI is a dynamic process, because when you talk about an individual credential like a certificate, it has a couple of skills attached to it. A degree program could have 100 skills attached to it. And being able to articulate the ROI of a degree program to a CFO that's willing to pay for thousands of their learners to get an education is one of the challenges, and one of the reasons why boundary spanning organizations like InStride exist.
Well, nice plug there. Very well said.
They appreciate it.
Now, you've been in admissions and recruitment for more traditional operations in the past. Uh, what's it like recruiting students into this sort of new world of credentials that kind of aren't the ones that people maybe grew up knowing about?
Thanks for that question, Eric. I love it. And I have to say, going back to one of your earlier points, my heart goes out to all the campus professionals who've had to work through on-campus recruitment this past year. I was lucky. I left on-campus programs behind in late 2019, and then all of a sudden we all ended up in this online world. So I think what's been great is that I would consider that to be sort of the B2C world, where as a business or as a university, I was recruiting individual customers or learners or students. And that's sort of the business of an admission office, to make sure they make the class, they get the right students. But in sort of a macro level, if you step back and look at it from a B2B, from a business to business standpoint, if you can give an employer the opportunity to work directly with an institution, you can serve so many more learners at scale with the same kinds of structures, with outreach, with support, with coaching, with FAQs, with microsites, with all the things you do to support a learner journey. But you're doing it at scale for a very large number of people, sometimes across continents. So it's a lot of fun.
Is it the same level of sophistication in terms of engaging with them and connecting with them and finding them? Or like, I just keep thinking about the tactics and strategy aspect.
Well, one of the key differences is that in many of the cases, we're working with learners that are receiving partial or full funding from their employer to pursue an education. So that removes a lot of barriers in the decision-making process, and it gives us
Right. The money is there.
the money is there. The show me the money. The money is there. We have a product that helps the learner through a decision support tool, and it gives them some options. But beyond that, the learner is working directly with an academic partner, a university, and their yield process takes over. We've primed the learner for a great academic experience and given them the tools and resources from their employer to say, you're going to make a good choice here. What happens next is we partner closely with a university to say, how are you reaching out to these learners? How are you coaching them through the enrollment process? What sort of materials can we provide them, or resources or webinars? So it parallels the process that probably a lot of the listeners are familiar with at an individual institution. I would say that it's growing in sophistication because it's a little different. As I've said, there are some nuances where, and as you sort of pointed out, this is still very new. Not a lot of institutions are doing this, but I think that you'll see this is a place folks are going, and it'll get built out as we go.
A lot of people have been saying that the admissions funnel is gone. There's no more sort of traditional funnel, or at least for the majority of students. And I think that, it's going to be a very different environment when you've got students who are coming in, grabbing a couple of different experiences as learners who are then going to take that experience into their workplace.
Absolutely. In some ways, it becomes a problem for the learner because then they end up with a lot of stuff and they don't want to invest in a degree because they've already done all these other things. So we've seen a lot of time and attention on credit for prior learning and evaluating some of these non-credit credentials so that they can stack into some of the degree completion programs that our university partners offer.
Yeah, I've heard the phrase is sort of like credit liquidity. If you can take some of those experiences and turn them into something that counts maybe towards either a complete degree or some sort of credential. But with your partners and the schools you're working with, I mean, do you see them kind of maybe like retargeting people and saying, okay, hey, you did this certificate in, I don't know, cybersecurity or what have you, but now we've got an advanced level or another offering that will be perhaps also valuable to you, even if your employer didn't sort of hand it to you?
They can do that, but what we're trying to do within the program that we offer the learner is really give them a set of options that their employer is willing to sponsor. So I think what would happen there is that they'd be presented with options that their employer may not be necessarily willing to sponsor, but they're going to counsel those learners no matter what. The bottom line is that the learner has to make the best choice for them, and the academic partner is going to help them to do that through a coaching process. I think the employer is going to make some decisions about what's best for their needs and their strategic priorities, and how can they enable learners to be a part of that and maybe even finish their degree.
In a way, I'm wondering if OPMs kind of paved the way for you all in terms of, it's a different segment of higher ed that you're working with in terms of delivery and partnerships. But, in the past, people kind of looked at online learning, especially some of the initial for-profit offerings, with a bit of skepticism. And do you see that as something that you all have to kind of work through as well?
Yes, and I think that it has been a challenge if you look at the Venn diagram of high quality academic programs and delivered in a scalable way online, and you put those universities in two buckets and you did the Venn diagram over, it's a very limited subset of institutions that you can look at and say, these would be really great folks that are really at the point to do this at scale. A lot of institutions want to do this, and it takes a lot of alignment and leadership and investment. And some institutions abandon online and they say, we tried it, we don't want to do it again. And now they're sort of looking at what they had and saying, can we rebuild this Frankenstein? I think it comes down to the being competitive and understanding that they need to be in the marketplace. But the OPMs, one of the key criticisms that you pointed out is that there has been variable quality of some of the program delivery by institution, for-profit versus not-for-profit, by accreditation. And working through that is, I think, where we're going next, because it has to be high quality, especially if an employer is going to pay for it.
Definitely. No, thanks for kind of digging into that a little bit. I think that it's always interesting when there's a new initiative in higher ed, be it MOOCs or OPM or whatnot, and how there's some initial skepticism and challenges to kind of get through. And then once things sort of even out, the outcomes are very positive for both institutions and students. To flip it just a little bit, I think the argument has been made, you made it very well, around why institutions should do this. But how do you get businesses to understand the value of these types of partnerships?
That's a really great way to flip it. And if you think about it, a lot of companies have understood for a long time the value of these partnerships. In fact, many of your listeners may be working at institutions that have these partnerships right now. What I ask them to think about is, in these terms, what does it do? What is it for? Is it a hood ornament? Is it a program the corporate partner has where it's more of a shiny object that you talk about? Or is it...
I like that hood ornament analogy. I haven't heard that one before. That's good.
Well, you keep it, have it. And then the other side of that is it a really effective partnership where there's lots of learners going through? And you can tell the difference. It's important to incentivize learners to complete programs. So getting a corporate partner to understand what it takes to build a successful program means, look, the CEO or someone in charge has to come out and say, this is a good idea. Learners are afraid they're not going to have any money after this. So there's a lot of these programs that are reimbursement models. And that's okay if that's what a corporate partner wants to do, but it's so much better if the corporate partner is just responsible for the bill and the learner isn't fronting the cash. There are things you can do to convince a corporate partner that a partnership with a university can be more effective. It can help more learners. And we can also help them at scale. We can help them find ways to reduce the cost per learner so that they can serve more learners with the same budget. There are a lot of ROI metrics that need to be shown. And it comes down to, how do you maximize the number of learners you serve? How do you maximize their experience? And how do you maximize the skills they acquire in those programs that are job relevant? And I think if you can show a corporate partner those things, they'll buy in because they immediately see why it's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, it seems like ASU, for example, they haven't had any issue at all getting that buy-in, or maybe they had and they worked through it behind the scenes.
Well, it's a very competitive market right now. We're talking about a $16 billion space where there are a lot of companies out there approaching this in different ways and working with different kinds of academic partners. And I think it's a big field, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation. It's going to be really exciting to see which solutions come out on top and where folks are really heading for their futures.
Right. Well, it seems like every time an institution runs one of these initiatives, though, it's an experiment that is sort of in its own little bubble, but at the same time, people can kind of borrow and iterate off of that. And I mean, because I'm just assuming that every campus isn't going to have its own sort of, I don't even know what Starbucks calls the facility that they have at Arizona State, but I'm assuming that you don't have to go that far.
No, of course. And I think they have a very special relationship. I think that's there are very few kinds of those relationships between universities and corporate partners. But I think it could be at a very micro level. When you have some opportunity to serve learners at scale, it won't be long before you see medium-sized businesses and small businesses offering opportunities for learners to get education through partners and universities. This technology will make that possible, and I think that you'll see support behind reskilling and upskilling, and the responsibility of employers to provide that to their employees through high quality universities and other education providers. I think that's sort of the zeitgeist right now, and it will continue to be.
Yeah.
The reason I say that is it was the zeitgeist before the pandemic, and we're still talking about it, which is has a staying power there.
Yeah, it's weathered a very significant global event.
Yeah.
Now, all of this wouldn't be possible without a hefty amount of digital transformation. And digital transformation was a hot topic in higher ed before the pandemic. It will continue to be so. But what is one thing that you see as being the next big game changer in ed tech?
That's a great question. I don't mean this to be a self-serving prediction for this podcast, but I think that the importance of everything tying into a central CRM is going to become crucial. I think the institutions that don't have the ability to track and communicate with a wide variety of learners coming under different programs, different modalities, different regionalities, it requires segmentation that the most successful partners can do. And I think that those that can't are stymied by sort of having too many systems or not enough structure. And that's going to be in this digital transformation world how folks get communicated with. So I see that working with our partners that have really strong sophistication, working with their CRMs, various different ones. And I think it is going to become continually important to revisit that and what it can be used for.
Well, thank you for that. And I just, state for the listeners on the show that we did not pay Ray or compensate him in any way for this.
I have not received a dime.
Blank.
I said that, and I say that regardless of who's asking me that question. I think that is important because institutions need to understand that they are competing with big companies that are already very good at this for the same learners.
It reminds me of how, we talk about upskilling and reskilling, how that needs to happen in the admissions and recruitment world, because it's not just about sending a bunch of people out on the road and going to high schools anymore.
Oh, sure. I think digital transformation and enrollment and admissions is ongoing. And I think you see how folks have worked with digital social media and how far LinkedIn has gone with some of their higher ed vertical. There's tremendous opportunity for using web analytics, using digital analytics, finding unique ways to leverage social media to reach learners at all stages of that funnel, which I think still exists. But
it's just a different kind of shape, maybe. I think there is a funnel, but boy, I don't think you can draw it on a piece of paper. I think it has to be sort of a 3D printed, multifaceted thing,
like a Dr. Seuss kind of a thing. Well, I think it's definitely important for enrollment management professionals and admissions professionals to gain digital marketing skills, whether that's a Hootsuite certification for $100 or going onto HubSpot and taking some courses or educating yourself on YouTube. These are critical skills. And unfortunately, I think admissions and enrollment folks don't ever really get credit for being such great marketing people. They do have to understand that.
Oh, it's part of the job. You have to be a skilled marketer. I mean, we've even begun to offer at Element 451 a new enrollment analytics certificate program because there was a need for this training, this upskilling. But Ray, any final thoughts as we close out the show today? I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation, Eric. Anytime, would love to come back. And non-traditional sources, what I'd love to leave you with is just that is all we're going to have soon. If anyone's looking at, because it's from a university, I'm okay with it. The universities are already building non-traditional brands. They're doing so they can create the kinds of credentials that you just said Element 451 has created. So I think as long as the content is good and the quality is high and the delivery takes the learner's experience into account, I say go for it. That's terrific. And you'll see more of that in this space soon.
I love it. Well, hey, Ray Lutzky, thank you so much for coming on In Your Element.
My pleasure.
That was Ray Lutzky, Director of the Academic Network at InStride, which you can find at instride.com. Thank you for listening to In Your Element, brought to you by Element 451 and part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. You can find more about the Element 451 Student Engagement CRM at element451.com. And if you like what you heard, please give us a rating and review, and follow along on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Eric Stoller, and we'll see you next time on In Your Element.